His arrogant smirk screamed that my shattered dream was just a joke, but I never expected the judge to give me the power to send a congressman's son to jail. The air in the courtroom was thick enough to chew. It tasted like cheap floor polish, stale coffee, and my own rapidly dissolving hope. Across the room, Preston Vanderbilt III, son of Congressman Vanderbilt, slouched in his chair next to a lawyer who probably cost more per hour than my entire life savings. Preston wasn't looking at the judge. He wasn't looking at his lawyer. He was staring right at me, a lazy, arrogant smirk playing on his lips. It was the same smirk he'd worn standing over the wreckage of my life, his designer sunglasses perched on his perfectly coiffed hair while he made a call to his daddy. My food truck, the rolling scone, had been my dream. I'd poured every cent I had, every ounce of sweat, and every sleepless night into that beautiful, gleaming, chrome and sky blue kitchen on wheels. It was more than just a business. It was my future, and Preston had turned it into a mangled heap of scrap metal in less than 5 seconds. He'd blown through a red light at 60 miles an hour, one hand on the wheel of his brand-new Mercedes G-Wagon, the other holding a phone to his ear. The police report was crystal clear. Multiple witnesses. Video from a traffic cam. It was an open and shut case. Or so I thought. The congressman's office had been relentless. First they sent a fixer, a smooth-talking man in a suit who offered me a check for $5,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. $5,000. The custom-built espresso machine alone was worth more than that. I told him to get lost. Then came the phone calls, vague hints about how difficult it would be for a small-time baker to go up against a man with friends in high places. They tried to paint me as the one at fault, claiming I'd hesitated at the green light. It was sickening. They weren't just trying to avoid responsibility. They were trying to erase the truth. But I held firm. All I wanted was justice. I wanted him to pay for the repairs, for my lost income, for the sheer terrifying violence of the crash that still gave me nightmares. I wasn't asking for a penny more. My lawyer, a public defender who looked even more tired than I felt, said our best shot was to make our case here, in traffic court, in front of the one judge in the state who had a reputation for being completely immune to power and influence, Judge Frank Caprio. Ms. Albright, Judge Caprio's voice was calm and steady, pulling me from my thoughts. Please tell the court, in your own words, what happened on the afternoon of May 14th. My hands trembled as I gripped the sides of the lectern. I took a deep breath and started. I described the beautiful sunny day. I talked about the lineup of customers I'd just served, the smell of fresh cinnamon and brewing coffee that used to fill my truck. My voice cracked when I described the moment of impact. The deafening screech of tires, the explosive crunch of metal, the world turning sideways in a shower of shattered glass and hot coffee. I explained that my entire livelihood was gone. The truck wasn't just my transportation, it was my bakery, my office, my dream. I was on the verge of signing a contract to cater a major city festival, a gig that would have finally made my business profitable. Now, I was facing bankruptcy. Tears were welling in my eyes, and my voice was barely a whisper as I finished. He didn't even ask if I was okay. He just got out of his car and complained about a scratch on his bumper. The courtroom was silent. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. Judge Caprio was looking at me with an expression of deep sympathy. And that's when it happened. From across the room I heard a sound. It wasn't a loud laugh, nothing that would get him immediately thrown out. It was worse. It was a quiet, breathy little snort, a dismissive chuckle of pure contempt. I looked up, my vision blurred with tears, and saw Preston Vanderbilt III leaning over to whisper something in his lawyer's ear, the smirk on his face now a full-blown, condescending grin. He had listened to me describe the absolute destruction of my life, and he found it funny. A wave of hot, white anger washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. My public defender put a steadying hand on my arm. The prosecutor's jaw tightened, but it was Judge Caprio's reaction that silenced the world. He didn't bang his gavel, he didn't raise his voice. For a full 10 seconds he just stared at Preston. The warm, grandfatherly demeanor he was famous for vanished, replaced by a gaze as cold and hard as granite. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a razor. He didn't address Preston. He addressed his high-priced lawyer. "Counselor," Judge Caprio said, his eyes still locked on the congressman's son, "I want you to lean over and ask your client if he still wishes to plead not guilty. Because from where I'm sitting, his behavior suggests he has absolutely no idea how much trouble he is truly in." Preston's lawyer went chalk white. He whipped his head around and hissed something at his client, his face a mask of pure panic. For the first time, the smug grin on Preston's face faltered, replaced by a flicker of indignant surprise. He clearly wasn't used to being spoken to this way, not by anyone. The lawyer, whose name was Mr. Thorne, shot to his feet, smoothing his silk tie with a trembling hand. "Your Honor, my sincerest apologies," he began, his voice suddenly 2 octaves higher than it had been. "My client is young. He is unaccustomed to the stress of a courtroom setting. His reaction was inappropriate, a result of nervousness, nothing more. We retract the not guilty plea and wish to plead no contest." It was a slick move. A no contest plea would admit no fault but accept the conviction, hoping to resolve this quickly with a simple fine and move on. It was a way to pay the ticket without ever having to say, "I'm sorry," or "I was wrong." They were still trying to buy their way out of this. Judge Caprio didn't even look at the lawyer. He kept his piercing gaze fixed on Preston. "Mr. Vanderbilt, please rise." Preston hesitated, looking to his lawyer for guidance. Thorne gave him a frantic, almost imperceptible nod. Slowly, begrudgingly, Preston got to his feet. He was tall, but he stood with a spoiled slouch, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his tailored trousers. He looked bored, annoyed, like this whole thing was a colossal waste of his valuable time. "Mr. Vanderbilt," the judge said, his voice dangerously soft, "do you find something about Miss Albright's testimony amusing? Do you find the destruction of a person's livelihood to be a source of entertainment?" Preston finally broke his silence. His voice was dripping with the easy confidence of someone who has never been told no in his life. "No, Your Honor, it was an accident. Look, I feel bad for her, I do. My father's insurance is handling it. We'll pay for the damages to her cart." He called it a cart. The single word, so dismissive, so belittling, was like a fresh slap in the face. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about a dented fender and a broken headlight. He thought his father's money was a magical eraser for reality. Judge Caprio's expression didn't change, but I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. "The damages, Mr. Vanderbilt. Let's talk about the damages." He picked up a sheaf of papers from his bench. "I have here the police report, which includes photographs. Exhibit A is a photo of your vehicle, a Mercedes G-Wagon. As Miss Albright stated, it has a scratch on the bumper. A rather expensive scratch, I'm sure, but a scratch nonetheless." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Then he held up another, larger photo. It was an aerial shot of the crash scene. My beautiful blue truck was on its side, its frame twisted into an unrecognizable pretzel of metal. The custom-serving window was shattered, the kitchen equipment inside violently thrown about. It looked like a bomb had gone off. "And this," the judge continued, his voice now a low rumble of controlled fury, "is Miss Albright's cart. This was her business, her sole source of income, valued at over $80,000, not including the specialized equipment inside. Equipment she is still making payments on, by the way. I also have a statement from her insurance company, noting that because the vehicle was commercial, her personal policy won't cover a cent of it. You didn't just scratch her bumper, son. You executed her career." Preston's jaw tightened. The mask of casual indifference was finally cracking, revealing the petulant child underneath. "It's not my fault the light was yellow," he mumbled, a pathetic attempt to rewrite history. "The light was red, Mr. Vanderbilt," Caprio shot back, his voice like a whip crack. "It had been red for 6 full seconds, according to the traffic camera footage. You were also traveling 25 miles per hour over the speed limit. And the multiple witness statements, which I have right here, all concur that you were holding a cell phone to your ear at the time of the collision." The judge leaned forward, his eyes boring into Preston. "You sit in this courtroom after nearly killing a woman through your own criminal negligence, and you have the audacity to laugh at her pain. You show no remorse, no understanding. You show nothing but the callous arrogance of a boy who believes his father's name is a shield against all consequence." He straightened up, his gaze sweeping from a now sweating Preston to the city prosecutor. A new, terrifying thought began to form in my mind. This was no longer about a traffic ticket. Judge Caprio was doing something else entirely. He was building a different kind of case. "Mr. Davies," the judge said, his voice dropping to a deadly serious tone that commanded the absolute attention of every person in the room. The prosecutor stood immediately. "We are here today to adjudicate a traffic violation. However, given the defendant's complete lack of remorse, the overwhelming evidence of extreme recklessness, and the catastrophic level of property damage that could have very easily been a fatality, I'm beginning to think we're in the wrong court. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. I felt my own breath hitch in my throat. The wrong court? What did that even mean? Mr. Thorne, the high-priced lawyer, looked like he was about to have a heart attack. His face, already pale, had turned a sickly shade of gray. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. Preston Vanderbilt III, however, just looked confused. The concept that this situation could escalate beyond a simple financial transaction was clearly alien to him. "The wrong court?" he repeated, a note of genuine bafflement in his voice. It was a fender bender. "What other court is there?" Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He looked less like a traffic court judge and more like a king holding court, weighing the fate of a particularly insolent subject. "There is criminal court, Mr. Vanderbilt," he said, the words landing with the weight of anvils. "There is the court that handles charges of reckless endangerment, felony destruction of property, charges that come not with fines, but with jail time." Jail time. The words echoed in the sudden, tomb-like silence of the room. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had come here hoping for enough money to maybe buy a used oven, to start again from my tiny apartment kitchen. The idea of Preston Vanderbilt III, the congressman's son, actually going to jail was so far beyond the realm of possibility, I'd never even considered it. Thorne finally found his voice sputtering. "Your Honor, with all due respect, that's unprecedented. This is a traffic matter. My client had no malicious intent." "No malicious intent." Judge Caprio cut him off sharply, his eyes flashing with fire. "Counselor, intent is not a prerequisite for recklessness. Do you think the drunk driver intends to kill a family of 4? Do you think the man texting while driving intends to swerve into oncoming traffic? His intent is irrelevant. His actions and the consequences of those actions are what matter. And his actions in this courtroom today have demonstrated a character of such profound indifference to the harm he has caused that I am compelled to consider every available option to ensure he understands the gravity of what he has done." The judge turned his attention back to the prosecutor, Mr. Davies. "The city has the discretion to elevate charges when new information comes to light, does it not? And I would consider the defendant's contemptuous behavior in this court to be very new, very relevant information about his character and his level of remorse." Mr. Davies, a man I'd initially dismissed as a weary, overworked city attorney, now stood taller. He seemed to draw strength from the judge's conviction. "Yes, Your Honor, we do have that discretion." This was happening. This was actually happening. I watched as Preston's world began to visibly crumble around him. The bored annoyance was gone, replaced by the dawning horror of someone realizing their privilege shield was full of holes. He looked wildly from the judge to his lawyer, his eyes wide with panic. "Jail? You can't be serious. My father—" "Your father is an elected official, Mr. Vanderbilt," Judge Caprio interjected, his voice cold as ice. "He is a lawmaker. He is not the law itself. And in this courtroom, his name carries no more weight than Ms. Albright's." He let that sink in, a profound and heavy silence filling the space between his words. Then he looked at me. His gaze was no longer just sympathetic. It was something else. It was apologetic, as if he was sorry for the system that had almost allowed this injustice to happen. "Ms. Albright," he said gently, "this court's primary function is to resolve minor infractions and ensure public safety. My powers here are limited. I can fine this young man. I can suspend his license, but I cannot make you whole. I cannot restore your dream. What was taken from you was more than just a truck. It was your future, and a simple fine feels insulting." He paused, holding my gaze. "However," he continued, "I am presenting the prosecutor with an alternative. But before I allow him to proceed, I want to present you with one. You are the victim here, so I will give you a choice." A choice? My mind raced. What choice could I possibly have? I was just a baker, a civilian caught in the gears of a machine I didn't understand. Judge Caprio looked from me to Preston, who was now visibly trembling. "You have heard my assessment. You have seen the defendant's character for yourself. I can right now sentence him to the maximum allowable penalties under the jurisdiction of this traffic court. A $5,000 fine and a 5-year suspension of his driver's license. Or—" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that every single person in the courtroom strained to hear. "Or I can dismiss this case without prejudice, allowing the city prosecutor to immediately refile it in Superior Court with the recommended felony charges. The choice is yours, Miss Albright. A guaranteed penalty today, or the possibility of true justice tomorrow? What do you want to do?" Every eye in the courtroom swiveled to me. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum that pulled all the sound and pressure directly onto my shoulders. Preston stared at me, his mask of arrogance completely shattered, replaced by a desperate, pleading terror. His lawyer looked at me as if I were a ticking bomb. This wasn't supposed to happen. People like me weren't supposed to hold the fate of people like him in our hands. My mind was a whirlwind. $5,000. It was an insult compared to what I'd lost, but it was also more cash than I had to my name right now. It could pay my rent for a few months, give me some breathing room. A 5-year license suspension was something, a tangible punishment. It was the safe bet. The legal system was a labyrinth, and Superior Court was a whole different beast. Congressman Vanderbilt's influence would be far greater there. They would bring in a team of cutthroat lawyers who would tear my life apart on the stand. I could lose. I could end up with nothing but more debt and heartache. But then I looked at Preston's face. I saw the kid who had laughed at my pain. I saw the entitled product of a system that tells the wealthy and powerful that the rules don't apply to them, that other people's lives are just minor inconveniences. And I thought about my truck. I thought about the smell of cinnamon, the happy faces of my customers, the feeling of turning the key in the ignition each morning, knowing I was building something that was mine. He hadn't just wrecked a vehicle. He'd tried to wreck my spirit. He'd assumed I would roll over, take the pittance, and disappear. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't let him. Justice wasn't just about the money. It was about accountability. It was about him, for once in his pampered life, facing a real consequence. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling but clear as I addressed the judge. "Your Honor," I said, my gaze locked with his. "I appreciate the offer. $5,000 would certainly help me right now. But you're right. It's an insult. It's not about the money. It's about what's right." I turned my head and looked directly at Preston Vanderbilt III. "I want the case refiled in Superior Court." A low murmur swept through the room. Preston looked like he'd been punched in the gut. His lawyer, Mr. Thorne, buried his face in his hands. Judge Caprio, however, simply nodded slowly, a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. "Very well," he said, his voice resonating with finality. He banged his gavel, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the silent room. "This case is dismissed without prejudice. Mr. Davies, I trust you'll proceed accordingly." "Mr. Vanderbilt," he said, his eyes narrowing on the now ashen-faced young man, "I suggest you call your father. You're going to need a different kind of lawyer." The following months were a blur of depositions, legal meetings, and relentless media attention. As Judge Caprio predicted, Congressman Vanderbilt brought out the big guns. They tried every dirty trick in the book. They dug into my past, tried to paint me as an unstable and litigious opportunist. They argued that my business was already failing, that the crash was a blessing in disguise. But they hadn't counted on two things. Judge Caprio's decision had ignited a firestorm of public outrage, and I had the truth on my side. Donations started pouring in. Local mechanics offered to help me rebuild the truck for the cost of parts. A prominent law firm took my case pro bono, eager to take on the congressman. The traffic cam video went viral. My story was everywhere. I was no longer just a baker with a broken truck. I was a symbol for every person who had ever been bullied by the rich and powerful. By the time we got to court, the tide had completely turned. Facing a mountain of evidence, a jury pool that had seen his son smirk on the evening news for weeks, and the very real possibility of his son serving actual time, Congressman Vanderbilt finally folded. On the day the trial was set to begin, his lawyers approached mine with a settlement offer. It wasn't a lowball this time. It was a number that was so large it made my head spin. It would cover the full replacement cost of a brand-new, top-of-the-line food truck, all my lost income, my legal fees and damages for the emotional distress. But there was one more condition. My condition. I wouldn't sign anything unless Preston Vanderbilt III issued a public apology. Not a press release written by a PR firm, but his own words, delivered by him, in person, to me. And so, a week later, I stood on the steps of the courthouse, not as a victim, but as a victor. Preston stood before me, without his lawyer, without his father, looking small and humbled in front of a bank of news cameras. He looked me in the eye, his own filled with a shame that seemed for the first time genuine. He apologized. He apologized for his recklessness, for his arrogance, for his laughter. He admitted he was wrong. 6 months later, the Rolling Stone 2.0 had its grand opening. It was bigger, better, and shinier than the original. The line of customers stretched down the block. As I handed a warm cinnamon scone to a little girl, I saw a familiar figure standing at the back of the line. It was Judge Caprio, no robes, just a man in a simple suit, waiting patiently like everyone else. When he got to the window, he smiled that warm, grandfatherly smile. "One black coffee, please," he said, "and one of whatever you recommend. I hear the owner is a real fighter." I smiled back, my heart full. "The scones are on the house, Judge," I said. "For you, always." He had given me more than a choice that day in court. He had given me back my faith that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win.